We are getting a Winter Soldier and Falcon show for the Disney streaming service. This is confirmed. It is absolutely crazy. I think it hints to something to do with the end of Avengers 4, and I think it gives us a glimpse at a crazy idea that might encapsulate Phase 4 of the MCU. We are breaking it all down. This is the Nerdy News Rundown. Let's get you filled in. Now, before we get into this, I need to shout out MC32RB, who got the nerd card question correct in my news show from yesterday. You definitely know your stuff when it comes to Marvel. So shout out to you, MC, and we will do another nerd card question at the end of this video. One more thing before we get into the story. If you like the Avengers stuff that I've been doing over here, you are going to be pretty pumped. I've got a cool video series about to come out, all talking about the quantum realm, the future of the MCU past Avengers 4. I have been working on this with Al Schuler, who's one of our executive producer Patreons over at the Patreon for the Den of Nerds. I am doing a live stream with the Patreons Monday night where we're going to talk about some future things planned for this channel and this video series with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so consider checking that out. It broke last night that Marvel Studios is hiring Malcolm Spellman to write a show for the Disney streaming service that will focus on Falcon and Winter Soldier. Malcolm Spellman is most famous for writing and co-producing on the hit Fox show Empire. Now, this is the latest in a series of stories all about shows for this Disney streaming service. I'm sure you've been following along with this. This seems to be a big deal. There's something that Marvel is doing with all of these characters. It's quite awesome that we're going to get MCU actual actors on these streaming shows, and it kind of gets me thinking about a possible theory for what is going to happen post Avengers 4 in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, before I get into this theory, I think it's important for us to remember and sort of look back on how these stories have all unfolded so far. So let's look at the timeline of events of things that have been announced and things that we have learned. Now, the first thing that happened was about a month ago now when it was announced that there will be a Loki and Scarlet Witch show being developed for the coming Disney streaming service, and that Tom Hiddleston and Elizabeth Olsen are said to reprise their roles. This was a big deal. This was the first kind of story that broke about this. People were saying, wow, this is pretty interesting. They're doing streaming services or streaming shows with the characters from the MCU, and those characters will then pop back up in the MCU. That is pretty hype. The next thing that happened was a story that broke from MCU Cosmic, where they claimed there was going to be a similar show with the Nick Fury character that would also be developed for the Disney streaming platform. However, after that story broke and sort of made the rounds, Peter Sciretta of Slash Film came out and said, no, that report's not accurate. They're actually doing something much bigger with the Nick Fury character when it comes to these streaming shows. Then, just on Monday of this week, we got reports that Marvel is developing a Hawkeye show, possibly a movie, but likely to be a show very similar to the streaming shows for Loki and the Scarlet Witch, and that this show would all focus around the Jeremy Renner Hawkeye training his replacement for the Hawkeye character in the MCU, which a lot of people think is going to be Kate Bishop. Then after that, we got the report from Variety just last night talking about how they're going to be doing a Winter Soldier and Falcon show on the Disney streaming service, and they have hired a writer. Now, it's important to note, them hiring a writer would put the production of that show far ahead of all of these other things. Most of these other things are in early stages of production. They're talking about concepts and ideas. If they're hiring a writer to do scripts for a show, that means they've already got a lot of the groundwork laid for this series, and it'll likely be the first one we see on the Disney streaming platform. Now, before I get too far into like where this is taking me, where I think we're going with Marvel and with the Marvel movies and shows, I do want to just say that the idea of a Falcon Winter Soldier streaming show is hype as hell. I mean, I love these two characters. I think they've set this up already. If you look at Winter Soldier, they have a lot of beef. And then in Civil War, classically, when Falcon meets up with Winter Soldier and Winter Soldier sort of comes back to the light side, they do not like each other. And that whole scene with them in the Volkswagen Bug was absolutely hilarious. Seeing their dynamic back and forth, it was very like Lethal Weapon, very buddy cop movie. And right then and there, I remember thinking, man, I'd love to see a movie with these two guys guys just forced to go on a road trip together. I think that would be absolutely hilarious. And so I think we're going to get some of that flavor in the show. I mean, it's pretty obvious that we'll get Sabastian Stan and Anthony Mackie to reprise their roles for this show if it is indeed going to be as big of a deal as I believe it will be. And that's super exciting. Now, beyond that, I think it also says something about what will happen in Avengers 4. A lot of people believe that Captain America will either perish or disappear at the end of Avengers 4, and that the mantle of Captain America will sort of be left in limbo. Somebody will need to take on that role, and I absolutely love the idea of the two characters that were closest to Steve Rogers having to work together in some kind of a long-form show, a big story, where they're both dealing with the death or the disappearance of Steve Rogers. You could even frame the show in a way where the two characters are sort of trying to figure out who among them should take over the mantle of Captain America. And I think even naming the show something like that, The Legacy of the Shield, or something like that, would be very, very interesting. In fact, it feels too good, right? It feels too awesome to maybe have Captain America disappear in the Avengers 4 movie, and then right after that have a streaming series come out which focuses on those two characters kind of dealing with what it's like now that Steve is gone. This actually seems very, very perfect and in line with what Kevin Feige likes to do with his movies, and that got me thinking. I remember a story that came out in the middle of last year talking about how there was this massive rumor that Marvel Television and the MCU were going to fix their relationship. There's going to be a much better crossover there, and they were actually going to tie into each other much better. Now, at the time, most people just considered this a crazy rumor. They were like, there's no way that's going to happen. Not when it comes to Ike Perlmutter and Kevin Feige, who classically have a bit of beef. However, if streaming is really the future, which a lot of people think that it is, and Disney is investing heavily in this future, it would make sense that the shows developed for the streaming service tying into the MCU would be high priority for Disney. This would bring a lot of value to the entertainment on the streaming service, and you have caked in fans of the MCU, which would be very excited to check out these stories on that service. I'm actually starting to believe that that rumor from last year about the television and the MCU working together better all had to do with these streaming shows. And maybe it's more than just one show. Perhaps it is a strategy for the MCU, which is now viable in the post-Avengers 4 Phase 4 Marvel Cinematic Universe. I mean, I've been thinking a lot lately about what's going to be the next big thing for Marvel. I mean, they're coming off of this crazy Thanos thing, one of the best crossovers in history. So anticipated. You've got 10 years of filmmaking, 22 movies, this awesome catalog. How do they continue to up their game? How can they continue to excite audiences? Well, I think part of the formula for that is going to do with these streaming shows. I believe Feige is going to come out and explain that there's a big tapestry at play in Phase 4, but that tapestry will not simply be told through the films, but will also be told between these very timely, canonically connected, and flowing right within the story shows on the streaming service. And I mean, think about it. It makes perfect sense, right? You have Avengers 4. This thing happens. What's the world going to look like after this? Well, what a better way to explore looks like, but through the lens of the two characters that know him best. And so it's very possible that the next phase of Marvel is going to tell a lot of different stories with a lot of different characters that they couldn't possibly fit into different movies. We're going to see all of these different things explored with awesome miniseries on the coming Disney streaming service. And just so you know, this is only one aspect of the absolute craziness that I think Marvel is going to pull off in Phase 4. And as I said before, a lot of this has to do with the theory videos that Al Schuler and myself are working on, so look forward to that. But suffice it to say, I believe this story, which of course is about the Winter Soldier and Falcon getting this show together, I think this story is a big hint at this weird plan that Marvel has, and I think it's going to be super hype to have these kind of stories kind of in between the big movies that we get on the silver screen. It's just going to be so much MCU, so much stuff to digest, and all of it will be connected in that classic Marvel Cinematic Universe way. I mean, hats off to Feige. This is going to be very, very intense for people. So that is the beginning of my crazy Phase 4 theory. I definitely want to know what everybody thinks. First of all, are you excited about the idea of this show? Do you agree that it's probably going to take place in the wake of Captain America dying? dying. And, I guess that's sort of like a spoiler for Avengers 4. And what do you think about that? And what do you think about the possibility that Marvel will begin to tell all sorts of stories, not only in its films, but on this streaming platform? And would you love it if the shows fit into the timeline in between these movies and filled out the canon? I mean, I'm going crazy for this idea. I think it's going to be amazing, but I want to know what everybody else thinks about that. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Now, all right, let's check that nerd card before we get out of here. I want to know what comic book creator created the character of Captain America. Here's a hint. It's not Stan Lee. So the question remains, what comic book character created the famous Captain America in the comic books? Answer that question in the comment section below. That's going to do it for the Wednesday show. You're halfway through the work week. I hope it's chugging along good for you. Happy Halloween to everybody out there that celebrates. Hope you get some good candies or have fun with the kiddies or whatever your plans are. As I always say, I hope you are having an awesome and nerdy day, and I will see you in the next video.